Three women who met the man accused of murdering Grace Millane on Tinder have given evidence today in the High Court in Auckland. The 27-year-old man, who has name suppression, denies the charge, and his trial is into its second week. The jury heard details of the women's interactions with the man and their sexual encounters. Our reporter Sarah Robson is covering the case and joins me in the studio. And just a warning, some of the details may be distressing to some listeners. Sarah, so we have heard from, in particular, one of these women who spent several hours giving her evidence today. What has she told the court?
Yeah, this woman who we aren't allowed to name, we weren't allowed to record her voice, and actually gave evidence via an audio-visual link, so she didn't appear in the courtroom. She told the jury that she had met the accused on Tinder back early last year in about March. Now, they'd met up for an initial drink, sort of hadn't messaged subsequently to that until they reconnected again in October last year on Tinder. Now, in early November, the pair met up in the CBD. She said it was meant to be for a drink, and they ended up going back to his apartment. They ducked out, grabbed some alcohol, and headed back upstairs. She told the court that the pair of them had been talking for several hours, normal conversation, talking about life, what was going on. She said she did much of the talking, and he had kept asking her questions about her life and what she did. Now, at one point, she told the accused that she did not want to have intercourse, but instead she did give him oral sex. Now, this is where the details do get explicit, yes. Yeah. So it was during this that he ended up putting his full weight on top of her, and she was unable to breathe. She said she was scared, she was kicking, trying to get him off her because she was having such a struggle breathing.
And just to be clear, you mean his full weight on her face?
On her face, yes, yep. That is correct. She told the court that she's a fairly fit person, so he would have felt the force of her fighting back against him. At one point, she decided this isn't working. She was getting increasingly terrified. She thought, oh my God, is this how I'm going to die? She ended up just deciding to go limp, and she thought that if she went limp, he would possibly realise that something was wrong and he would get off her. Now, she kept going for a further period, and eventually when he did get off her, he asked her what was wrong, and he didn't sort of realise the extent to which she had been struggling breathing, and she told the court that his response to that was chilling, and it's something she continues to think about, and eventually she was able to get out of his apartment.
Just before we move on to the questions that she might have faced from the defence, again, is this in the same apartment that Grace Millane went to?
Yes, this is the same apartment in the City Life Hotel where we do know that Grace Millane died sometime on the night of December 1st and 2nd. Yes.
Okay, so this woman would have already also faced questions from the man's defence lawyer, in this case Ron Mansfield, was it, asking the questions?
Yes.
Yeah, so what was he asking of her?
Mr Mansfield spent a lot of this afternoon combing through about 708 text messages that the woman and the accused had exchanged between the 2nd of November, so around the time that they met up, and the 3rd of December. Now, Mr Mansfield was asking this woman and pressing her quite hard on why she kept texting him back. She said that she feared that he knew too much about her life. She was worried about what might happen if she just let him go cold turkey. Mr Mansfield also suggested that perhaps she had been exaggerating her story about what had happened that night in her apartment once she knew that he was connected to Ms Millane's death. She hit back against that, saying that Mr Mansfield could not minimise her experience, and she insisted that she was not lying. Mr Mansfield pressed her again on her story and asked whether she was in fact pursuing a relationship with the accused man, and she had to change her story once he was facing a charge in court. She told the jury that she was ashamed and embarrassed about what had happened. She was embarrassed that she had put herself in that unsafe position in the man's apartment.
And there were two other women who also gave evidence. They were earlier in the day. So what did they have to say?
That's right. So the first woman we heard from had also met the accused on Tinder. When they were messaging, she had actually told him that she was into rough sex and being choked. They did meet up for sex at his apartment, and she told the court that the man did in fact choke her with one of his hands around her neck. She said her breath was restricted a bit, but it was the right amount of pressure, and the key here is it was consensual. We heard from another woman who had also been messaging the man on Tinder but had never actually met him in person. She told the jury that he had told her that he'd expressed an interest in some of his sexual interests. They included feet, dominating and strangulation. He had actually messaged her or called her on the 3rd or 4th of December. So this is after Ms. Millane had died. And the woman told the court that he'd wanted to go out on a date with her and was trying to arrange that. But she said she wasn't keen because of what he had told her previously.
There'll be a lot of people who are covering or following this very closely. Sarah, do we have an indication of what evidence is going to be called tomorrow?
So the first woman I spoke about earlier, she is actually back on the stand tomorrow morning to finish her cross-examination. She actually broke down in tears when she realised this afternoon that she would have to come back and face further questions. We're about halfway through the Crown's witnesses so far. We're still to hear from the pathologist, who the Crown has told us previously will give evidence about the cause of Ms. Millane's death.
Right. Thank you very much. That is Sarah Robson, who is covering that trial, the murder trial in the High Court in Auckland.